Welcome back. I was debating on whether or not I should, wait a little while before I got into this idea, or if I need to kind of get on with it. And considering the reality of how things are in the world, perhaps I should go ahead and just say this most important thing that I really need to say. You see, as the result of my moment of equanimity, I didn't start out to prove one belief or another. It was not my intent. None of that. I wish I could prove how irrelevant the idea of religion was to me at the time. Even though prior to that I did have a background, I hung out with evangelists is all I can really say. But I didn't really follow that faith so much. I just kind of like went along with them, But there was that. And so I knew the story to begin with, but, I come from a Christian society, so I did know the story of Christ as they told it. And as we studied it and all that in these Bible study classes in the church. I did go to church for a while, but I quit going in the early 90s. I didn't really I more or less, to be honest with you, I went to this evangelist church to satisfy a friend of mine. That's the only reason why I went, was so that I could in a way take advantage of a charity, because I was desperate at the time. So I kind of went along with things, but I never really believed in what they were saying. I mean, I did, and then I didn't, because I knew I had a destiny. And I knew that I had a personal relationship with God even prior to this moment of equanimity. That moment of equanimity, though, it was the realization of kind of my destiny. And that was another component of it. When it finally just hit, when the answer came, it was like a memory of myself asking a question and then, wonder if God hates me. And God gave me an answer. And to prove it, he had to answer everything else I could possibly ask of him. And then I would know that, yeah, it does come from God for real. And in that, I considered what was the story of Christ. I kind of thought to myself, there was a moment when God was, it still works now. Even now, when I kind of take an idea or a religious concept, and I kind of run it through what I know is my connection with God in a way, and it comes back, I'll kind of in a way receive a truth or something. And one of those things that I run through that, one of those things that I had to consider in my new state of consciousness, so to speak, is kind of what enlightenment really is. And in that state, I considered the story of Christ. And it came one part of the story that kind of God sort of directed me to consider, about the best way I can put it, was a story of Christ on the water, as he walked on the water. What is it? It's here in this. This is what, it's like a King James version of the Bible. And it is this, where God says, I didn't start out to prove the reality of Christ or anything like that, or even the God of Abraham or anything along those lines. I was going to kind of be in opposition to all religion, but this is now where the truth has led me to the idea of Christ, okay? And I know that Christ was real. but he is not who the Christians believe that he was. You see, I considered the story of Christ on the water. And as I did, my concern was, is the universe truly existential? Is it a godless universe? Or is it not? You know, kind of like this idea, this ever within relativity, within Einstein's relativity theory, you have what's called random probability, and it's kind of like how the universe is set up in a random. No, that's not entirely. Well, it's like the symmetry of the universe was a orderly structure, and what broke it was randomness, the structure of randomness, so to speak. Well, that's not it either. In any case, there's this damn thing called random probability in science, and in relativity, and it's a kind of like a way for them to account for the randomness of the universe. They love it when they can prove that the universe is random, that stuff just happens, and there is no kind of like divine order. There is no structure to it. That's what science loves. They love the idea of randomness. And so they'll throw the quantum in your face in order to prove that concept of the random, to say that, look, it's truly an existential universe, hence the philosophy of string theory. But in all truth, though, when we talk about structure, I get that that is what this story of Christ on the water was about. Okay? That's what became very clear to me when I considered Christ, the story of Christ, the idea that here there is structure that he may stand upon. And that was what he was doing when he was walking on the water. He was standing on the structure. Not so much for them then, but for us today. Because when I consider the story of Christ today in my enlightened state, and I consider the story of him walking on the water, what I get from him directly in that consideration is that here there is structure that I may stand upon in defeat of the random, because the universe exists to satisfy God's will upon it. As he would say, my will upon it. My singular will upon it, to bring about what he wants. See, a society of diverse individuals that he may then live among. So, in that way that he defined the universe, that through his will, so to speak, as to what the objective of his will is, it is a structure that he can then stand upon to show us that the universe exists to satisfy his will upon it. And that's what I get when I consider the story of Christ on the water. What the apostles recorded was an admonishment. Now, the reason why they did was because you really got to understand, you really have to understand what it was like for the apostles then, and how they were in the midst of the age of magic and mysticism. So consequently, they were scared of everything all the time. They didn't have any idea what was ultimately beneath the waves. See, if you would have asked them then, what color is the ocean? And they would have said, well, it's black when it's angry, it's white when it's at war with the shore, and it's blue when it's resting or at peace or something. See? Because everything they did was an observance to a mystic concept. Like the idea that everybody had a certain level of magic that they were able to do. And some people's magic was just a little bit better than others. And that is why Christ kind of chose to live among them, fully empowered as a God as he was. Because he didn't abandon that identity to live among them, you see. He still lived among them as a complete God of the universe, and as such, He really couldn't help himself be who he was, ultimately. So that's why he picked that time to then live among them, so that they would know, they would consider, they would say, well, that's pretty powerful magic. But that's all that they would say. They wouldn't say that it was God on earth, which ultimately he truly was. And that's what God shows me at that moment. Here there is structure that I may stand upon in defeat of the random, because I, as God of the universe, exercise my singular will upon it. See? That's what enlightenment shows you when you consider the story of Christ as it is. And the reality, not only as it is in the Bible, but you see this with that thought causes you to also look at other things. You're not limited by, the priest who says you can only look here. No. Anywhere you can to get the best information, to get the most complete picture, that's what you need to do. That's where all together in all of it is where the truth then comes, see? So there's a Book of Mary, which is a Dead Sea Scroll, and it talks about Christ's early life, where as a child he knocked one of his buddies off of a roof and killed him. And so his parents disciplined him as a child, and kind of they knew that he had powerful magic, and that's how they kind of approached him. And in a way, they disciplined him to make him kind of like use his magic to raise the kid from the dead. And that is what's perfectly outlined in that Book of Mary. So you see, God couldn't help be anybody other than God, even in the identity of Christ. Okay? And that's what he shows me when he is standing upon the water. Here there is structure that I may stand upon as God of the universe. This is what he was. So anytime there is an accounting, there is a report, there is kind of a statement that Christ somehow pleaded with God, how it is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they've been. Nope. Not true. Didn't happen. See, the Christians, in their efforts of governance, have added quite a bit here and eliminated quite a bit, to where they try to imply God sits in a state of governance so that they can sit in a state of governance. And that's what they get when they imply that's really where they're going with that. Some of that stuff that they do, that miscalculation of theirs. And there was something in John a while back that was about to come to the Father, you have to come through me, basically, is what this book of John, it's some verse in John, I'd have to look it up to actually get the numbers, but God never really did say that. Christ never really did say that. He would say, I am the truth and the way and the light. Yes, God, Christ as God would have said that, but he would not have said, only through me do you get to the Father. Say, he would not have been this from that in his thought or his philosophy. And he was also God on earth, so therefore he never said that. And that is a fabrication of the church, once again. So, as Christ then, that's what I really contend, see. I'm really saying Christ was God on earth. He had to be God on earth. But as he was God on earth, the apostles could never know that he was God on earth unless they were to lose their sense of individuality, as we have discussed before. So you see, the apostles really could never know that this was God on earth. Now consider the story of them and the way that they cast their nets. you see, as everything they did was kind of an observation of some mystical concept. That was the epitome of their times. They cast their nets in a religious fashion, or a mystical fashion, or whatever, because to them, they didn't have a Jacques Cousteau back then. They didn't have no science. They didn't know that. Well, they did know, and then sometimes they didn't know. A lot of times they didn't know, or they chose not to know. And sometimes they did. That, the fact that fish kind of school together, some people would have known. Ultimately, the truth is, they really did know the truth, and then they also kind of like agreed to believe in the mystic side. And what they really kind of believed was that it was magical, that the net just filled with fish. And so they always said some kind of incantation or some kind of mystic procedure to magically then throw the net in the water and then it fill with fish. And so that's what's revealed with the story of cast your nets. As Christ says to cast your nets, they cast their nets in the same fashion they had done before they met Christ, even though they had been with him for a decade or so, followed him around, saw him do all these things. Well, they could never know that was God on earth, and they didn't get to know him enough to realize that they didn't have to do any of that mystic stuff anymore. It was just completely over. And so that's what God saw when he walked across the water and got in the boat. He saw in them complete fear. And it's like, knowing that what he did was a message for the future. Here there is structure that he may stand upon and defeated the random. See? And that was something that would never be known by them then, because their fear overwhelmed them. Because they didn't know what was underneath the water, and when they got scared, they got really scared. And there was nothing Christ could do to break them of their fear, short of breaking them of their individuality. So he just kind of like probably rolled his eyes and said, well, they're screwed. And they were. They were pretty much screwed as far as what they were able to put together here in this thing. And humanity is screwed because of it. And yet, God could not have existed on this earth at any other time in a way that he would be accepted as one of them, see? Because he couldn't be anything other than God. And so he had to have his powers in full effect. And as a person living a life here on this earth, you got to be who you are. That's even a rule that God himself kind of abides by. I mean, you can try to conform to something you're not, but how productive is that? So in the end, though, what I'm really getting at is Christ was God on earth, not the Son of God. And there we have it. Christianity believes that Christ was the Son of God. And they believe that there is a thing called sin. Okay, now this is the real trick. As Christ was God on earth, and as he died a death on the cross to remove sin from the human experience, guess what? It's been impossible to sin against God since. So you see, all this preaching about sin is nothing more than a methodology by which the church can make you tithe, can make you pay your taxes, can make you what is the way I want to say this? Can make you, can like trick you into giving your wealth over to them with the idea that somehow God cares about that. You see, you're very afraid. Most people on the earth today are really scared. Because there was like a girl a while back. I had lobby guard duty at some place I was working at. And there was this recently saved person in there, just come from her tent revival or something. And she was going on about praise Jesus this, praise Jesus that, and everything. And then so she kind of come up to the desk, gonna try to proselytize to me, and I just looked straight into her to really see what she was about in her heart. And that pseudo happiness, joy, and stuff just melted away, and what I saw in her was complete fear. So you see, there we have it. The failure of the evangelist, the message of the evangelist to expunge from her the fear in her heart of what she did not know about spirituality and where she might end up in relation to that. So, the evangelist message is an ineffective one as far as bringing your heart to God, calming your fear and allowing you to connect with the hand of God that is upon you. They're completely incompetent at that, which is why they're in bed with people like Donald Trump and Roy Moore and all that. Because, it's like someone who is incompetent enough to not know that the ship is sinking, or to know that the ship is sinking, and then incompetent enough to try to say, no, it isn't, no, it isn't, no, it isn't. Even as they're drowning, as the rest of the world is drowning. So you see, as it was God on earth, in the identity of Christ, and as Christ died a death on the cross to remove sin from the human experience, it becomes all sin for everyone for all time, regardless of what you believe. So it has been impossible to sin against God since Christ. See? So all this preaching about sin is preach about nothing, because they want to govern, and so they're not willing to give it up. You see, it clearly says the cock crows thrice, and that's what they're guilty of. See, the cock has crowed thrice because the church has denied Christ. The very fact that he died a death on the cross to remove sin from the human experience, and the fact that they're still preaching sin as though it's a real thing. My God, you people have gotten caught thinking that the house is yours. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Yep. God's on to you now. So stay tuned, because there'll be more to come. So see you next time.